Calling to order the Public Services Committee meeting, Tuesday, March 11th, 2014 at 4:56. First item on the agenda will be review and approval of the minutes dated February 11th, 2014.
Move to approve, Erpenbach.
Second, Karski.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
That passes 4-0. All right. The next thing on the agenda will be our vehicle for hire ordinance. We'll have Mr. Jim David, our legislative operations manager, give us an update on where we're at today.
Good afternoon, committee. Jim David, City Council staff. During the January Public Services Committee meeting, each of you had requested some changes to the working draft, and I'll run through that along with some changes that staff is recommending. If you look at 124.005, we did add in there that we clarified that language that it should be the maximum rates of fare that would be included in the printed card that is in the taxi cab itself. One of you did, though, request not only that the maximum be included, but also the actual amount that the taxi cab is charging their customers. And a second item for your consideration is whether or not the licensing specialist should, or the city should, identify the format that's used in those cards. As you'll see on this slide, different taxi cab companies could use different ways of communicating the amount that should be charged. For example, in ordinance, it says for the first 1/10 of a mile, it's $2.60, but the next 1/9 of a mile is 35 cents, whereas others might say the first mile is $5.75, and then each additional mile is $3.15. So just for your consideration, staff was recommending that maybe that format should be looked at by this committee. The next item is 124.005F. And this has to do with the deceit as to direct route. This is all new language that the committee had agreed on, but we did add an additional sentence in there. Then that change just reflects a scenario where a passenger may request a route that is not the most direct route. In .007, we look at the vehicle signs and markings, and again, this was a consensus of the committee during the last meeting that those decals should be permanently affixed to the taxi cab. There was also a question on whether the decals could be on the windows, as that's allowed by law. We did check with the city attorney's office, and the decals can be placed on a window as long as it does not obstruct the view of the driver. If we look at .008, driver prohibitions, this is a staff recommended change, and where this comes from is right now, and this is new language that the Public Services Committee had approved in the past, but it says it shall be unlawful for any driver or for any business to permit a driver to operate taxi cab more than 12 hours out of every 24 hours. Staff is just recommending that business be included in that because right now the burden is only on the driver. We thought it was necessary to also include business to kind of have that balance. If we look at 9, the equipment of taximeters, there's going to be 2 staff recommended changes to this portion of the ordinance. Previously, this section had allowed for 5% discrepancy either way to the benefit of the passenger. But under further review and communications with one of the manufacturers, Centerdyne, Handbook 44 actually requires that it be 1% over the amount or 4% under. And during those conversations with Centerdyne, the representative from Centerdyne who has spoke to this committee in the past, there had been questions about, well, how often does a taximeter need to be recalibrated and thus resealed? He felt that it was necessary only when a transmission is worked on or the tires are changed. If you're simply putting more air into a tire, having to deflate the tire, that should not impact the taximeter. In fact, those discrepancies, the 1% above and the 4% below, should account for those re-airing and not airing those tires. And also on 9, in consultation with the administration, They are looking at the idea of having an RFP go out to a vendor to handle the taximeter sealing, and this language would just allow for a 12-month RFP process. We put in 4 months after City Council adoption. In .029, the issuance of the business license, this addresses a couple of items. The first one is, right now within the application, it does require that a business put down their information from their sales tax license. This simply codifies that. In E, the applicant is in good standing with the Department of Labor. As many of you are aware, we did meet with representatives from the Department of Labor. We did find that there are limitations from what the city can request from the Department of Labor. There's some privacy issues. But there is no limitations on what an actual business can request from the Department of Labor. So what this language would allow is for the licensing specialist to request that the applicant provide the information that they are in good standing with the Department of Labor. So it's kind of a way around that to make sure that that business is in good standing. And then finally, this was a loophole that exists in current ordinance letter F. All drivers are licensed per this chapter. So we just want to make sure that the business, when they do apply for the license, that their drivers are licensed. If we look at 60, again, this addresses a loophole that exists. It says that it shall be unlawful for any driver or for any business to permit a driver to operate a vehicle for hire for the conveyance of passengers. And this, again, just clarifies that language. It fixes a loophole because right now there is nothing that requires a business to make sure that their drivers are properly licensed. For your consideration, part of your discussion would be whether or not to include the actual rate along with the maximum rate within those posted schedules. Does the city want to require a specific format for those schedules? And then the effective date, requesting to extend that taximeter section in consultation with the administration. That was the only section right now that they're requesting an extension for an effective date. And then if there's any other changes that you may have. And then finally, I'm just going to hand this off to a representative from the administration to talk about implementation.
First, Jim, I'm going to see if there's any questions from the committee. Do we have any questions to Mr. David on anything, any of these changes? Jim, I do have one question, and that is with the sealing of the meters. When you discussed this with the meter company representative, did you guys talk about if there was like our fuel surcharge where they would have to adjust the meters?
No, the surcharge, no, that did not come up. It was just when a taximeter would need to be recalibrated, and that taximeter recalibration tracks the miles or the distance along with any waiting time. The fuel surcharge is now, as everyone is aware, it's just right on the front end. So when you get into a taxi cab, that fuel surcharge is included with that drop charge. So the fuel surcharge, I think, would be irregardless of the actual taximeter.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have no other questions. I guess we can move to the city attorney.
Keith Allenstein, City Attorney's Office. It's my understanding that you wanted some information on how this was going to be enforced. We had some discussions, and it appears that the best plan that we have for enforcement would be that any of the on-the-road issues, whether a particular driver is driving license, things like that, those would be handled by law enforcement since they're the ones that are out on the street. The regulatory type of issues, whether the proper insurance, proper documentation, things like that are in place, would fall on licensing specialist Jamie Palmer. And to the extent that she needed an investigative arm or more help in that area, we've been told that we will be able to utilize code enforcement officers on an as-needed basis. That just leaves basically the issue with the sealing of the meters. And I don't think there's been a determination yet as to whether we would do an RFP process or try to handle that in-house. But it's my understanding with that sealing the meters, basically it is marking out a mile stretch and having the cabs run that mile and make sure it shows a mile. So whether that would be handled internally with city employees that we currently have or an RFP process, that's why we, for the implementation of that, we would request that that be put out about 4 months, because if we do an RFP process, it can take up to that amount of time. And I'm happy to answer any other questions if I can.
Councilman Karski.
Yes, Keith, we reference under the taximeter equipment, South Dakota codified law, and I know they have a Department of Weights and Measures. Would they have any involvement in this at all?
I don't think we've ever spoken to them about whether they could or would be willing. All the taxi regulations are left up to the individual municipalities, so I don't, I mean, like I said, you're talking about as far as the sealing of the meters, you know, whether they're willing to or not, it isn't certainly something that they couldn't do, because like I said, as I understand it, it's just simply marking off a mile and making sure that the taximeter shows a mile. I don't know that we've had any discussions with them. I don't, Jim, have you have? They have no interest, apparently. So, which.
Are you familiar with this state statute at all? I mean, does it tell us specifically that taxi cabs have to be within this certain standard?
As I understand it, it basically just indicates that this handbook 44 is what's to be used for determining different, not just specifically to taxi cabs, but for all different types of weights and measures.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Keith.
Thank you.
With that, I'm going to open this up. Do we have any, before I open it up to public testimony, do we have any conversations, questions on any of the changes that we've seen today? Councilman Karski.
We have 4 really considerations that we need to talk about from what I've seen, and you know, we talk about, I think we should talk maybe about them individually between us, or unless you have a better way to go about it, but I'd like to open it up talking about the posted rate. You know, I really don't care what a taxi cab charges as long as they're not charging more than what we allow them to charge. If they want to charge less, to me that's up to them, and I don't see the need to post that. Anybody feel differently on that?
Now, are you discussing the permanent marking on the outside of the vehicle, or the posting with inside the vehicle?
The posting with inside.
Okay, say that again, Councilor Karski. You're not uncomfortable with them just posting what the maximum is on the outside of the vehicle?
Correct. You know, they might charge the maximum from 10 at night to 2 o'clock on a Saturday morning, but they might charge less than that at less competitive times. So, I mean, as long as they're not charging more than the maximum, I can see where taxi cabs could vary their rates even on a daily basis.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that.
I guess I agree with you. When we were first discussing the permanent markings of rates on the vehicle, I sort of question that too, and I really question whether they have to put their current rates on, because like you said, they could change them at any time. So I also believe that we need to find something other than saying you have to paint it on your door. I do like the window option, and I think it should only be the maximum rates too.
That's required. Only the maximum rate would
Only
be
the
required.
maximum rate. And then, Mr. David, if you'd like to.
Just to clarify, the outside markings do not include the price or do not include the fare. It's just within the compartment of the taxi cab in a postcard or a schedule. That would be in the compartment, not on the outside. Within the current version of the ordinance, it just talks about the business name and phone numbers. Those are only the items that would be permanently affixed to the outside of the taxi. So just to clarify that for you.
At one time, we were discussing rates on the
Definitely.
outside too, though.
Yep, that is correct.
Okay, I think that's where we got, okay, thank you.
So do we need to decide whether we want that maximum on the outside of the taxi? Because the ones posted on the inside, I still feel strongly the going rate needs to be posted when that person gets in so that the consumer knows what they're going to be charged. And if that's just a card of some sort, that's easy enough to change. Isn't it?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I don't know that the rates have to be outside on the vehicle. Especially if it's only going to be the maximum, because then they're all going to say the same thing, right? Because to me, it was a shopping thing. As a consumer, I'm looking at the taxis in a row going, oh, that one's $1 cheaper than that one. But we're not saying that.
Correct.
So to me, it's not a consumer issue. I'm going to have to open the door and ask the guy, what's your rate, if I'm really, truly shopping, right?
But what about the visitor to the community? You know, that's planning on taking a ride someplace, and if they're visiting and not, you know, maybe that would determine whether or not the maximum rate might determine whether they take a taxi or not.
I don't know, I guess my feeling on that is, are we getting a little too far into discussing the rates of a private company or private companies? If we show what the maximum rate is, then it's up to that consumer to shop out and find their best rate or best deal.
Right, but we're saying that we're not thinking that we need to put that max rate on the outside.
Well, I think if it's shown on the card that you're saying that could be displayed on the inside, here's the max rate and here's the rate we're charging. Because like I said, a card is easily changed. So do we really need to have anything on the outside of the vehicle if we are displaying those rates on the internal part of the vehicle? Councilor?
I guess I'm trying to walk that thin line between, you know, consumer protection, because that's where I'm going to come down every time with this, but trying not to be a burden to the business at the same time. So the maximum rate is the maximum rate is the maximum rate. It's going to be the same if that's what we require them to put on the car. So to answer your question, if I'm a visitor from out of town and I've just walked out of the airport terminal and I've walked over to the taxi stand, there's 3 cars in a row, I'm going to have to just ask. You know, are you $4 or are you $5 or what I'm going to have? And I would probably have to do that in other communities as well. I remember getting into cabs, not knowing what I'm going to pay until I get in there.
Councilor Makarski?
My experience when I've traveled, and you go to Vegas last month, and you queue up in line, and whatever cab comes up is the cab you get in, and you don't even get a chance to ask what the rate is.
Exactly.
I mean, you know, and that's why we're talking about what we're talking about today. We don't want, I mean, for the sake of the consumer, we regulate this industry. It's an industry that is regulated, and for the protection of the consumer, I think we just need to have the maximum protection, the maximum rate for that protection. But yeah, I don't see the need to constantly be changing that or be advertising what your current rate is. I mean, it's not, and maybe somebody that knows a little bit more about taximeters could address this. How hard is it to change that rate in the taximeter? Are you going to change that every day or every week or whatever the case may be?
Councilor Aguilar?
Well, I'm just wondering, I think that we're probably in agreement that we don't need it on the outside. But on the inside, I think that, I mean, forever, whenever I took a taxi in some other city, they've always had the posted rate of what I'm going to be charged, how much, you know, the startup, and then how much per mile. And I mean, I can't see us not doing that, I guess.
No, I agree. That's right on. You know, and Jim David has asked us to talk about the format on that card. You know, do you want to do the 10th of a mile or the 9th of a mile? I'm like, let's not make people do math, right? I think it's this much for a mile. and this much for how many miles after that. You know, let's not add to, I mean, that's part of it for me as you're, again, a visitor in a city and you're jumping into a cab and you go, a tenth of a mile for, is this much, and then after 1 mile, then I figure it by a ninth of a mile. You know, let's not do that. Let's make it simple.
I could agree to both of those.
Okay, so what I have on the changes, we don't want it on the outside of the vehicle. Displayed on the inside of the vehicle, we want
Max and
the
curves.
max charge that can be charged and the current rate
Yep.
that they're charging in the vehicle.
Correct.
Okay, got that. All right.
Yeah.
Councilman Karski, do we need to vote on that, or I think we just make those changes and then we'll vote on everything at the end. Did you have another point that you wanted to bring up, Councilman Karski? I thought you said you had 4.
Well, just the 4 we talked about, and we've already covered 2 of them. The effective date, request to extend the taximeter section, making that effective up to 4 months after we adopt the ordinance. The reason for that was for the installation of the equipment, I'm assuming, correct? Or what was it about?
It was for the RFP process if the administration goes in that direction.
And the RFP is to establish what?
Yeah, the RFP would be for a vendor separate from the city to actually just handle these, the sealing of the taximeters independently. So the city would actually select an outside vendor to evaluate each taximeter and then seal it.
So it wouldn't be up to the companies to buy their own or go out and,
Yeah, the companies buy their own taximeter, but they have to bring their vehicle in, have it calibrated, and then sealed by this third party.
and that would be done how many times? About once a year? It has to be
Yeah, I
recertified?
had an email with Centrodyne on how, just that exact question, and they said if, for example, if you have transmission work, you're probably going to have your taximeter recalibrated and resealed. If you buy new tires, you're going to have it recalibrated and resealed. If you need to air up your tire, the over and under, the 1% over, the 4% under, should cover that discrepancy, if there is a discrepancy because of low tire or it's overinflated.
Councilor Aguilar.
Yeah, so from that email that you received and shared with the committee this afternoon, I would say that our size city, once a year would be enough
For calibration.
for calibration.
See, I guess my question comes into, we're talking about sealing these meters, but anytime the cab company has to change their rates, don't they have to break that seal and go into that meter?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so basically, we're talking that once a year, we're going to calibrate and seal the meters, and then after that,
It's
Yeah, well, let's,
dependent on
it's
what
dependent
they-
on the cab
yeah.
company.
Or, if I might, the ordinance, the way that we're writing it right now, says by complaint as well. And if we decide, if the city decides, either on complaint of any such person or without such complaint, to inspect any taximeter, the city can do it at any time, according to the way we have it written right now.
And I guess if I may continue on this too, is that, you know, I think we maybe are getting a little too tied up on the sealing of these meters instead of the monitoring of them to make sure that they are, you know, working in accordance. But if we, you know, once again, that seal's gonna have to be broken by the cab companies if they change their rates. So do we have to have them
Right.
go to the
Yes.
calibration company and have the calibration company do this? Because that's going to be a major expense.
But maybe it would cause them to look at, I mean, they have a good maximum that they can use, and maybe changing the amount of fares is, you know, something that they have to think long and hard at. You know, I think that the city has set the maximum at a fair amount, and maybe they need to look over a period of time. I don't know. I have a problem with, you know, I don't know how many cab companies we have this month, but having them change their fares every month would be ridiculous. I mean, in most cities, I don't think that that's the practice.
Councilor Karski, did you have anything else that you wanted to?
Well, kind of continuing with, I think, where you were going, Councilor Anderson, is if the meter is not sealed, but is inspected and calibrated, is there a need for it to be sealed or to have that seal on it?
And what I was thinking is that the seal would actually just be a mark, just be a sticker that says it was calibrated and have the date on it. And then any time during that year, if it needed to be inspected, you know, it could be inspected. But to say, I guess I just don't like the ideal of saying that we're sealing these meters because we can't. You know, the cab companies do have to have access to these meters to make their adjustments and changes also. Councilor Aguilar?
Could we have Jim David speak to that from what he's learned about other cities, how this is handled?
I do have some statistics that I can show up there that shows these other cities. You'll see here in this slide that the City of Sioux Falls does not currently inspect taximeters. They do not seal the taximeters. The other one that does not is Des Moines. They do not seal their taximeter or are inspected. Cedar Rapids, Fargo, Lincoln, Omaha, Rochester, St. Paul, kind of a diversity of cities when it comes to population. You can kind of see there who seals it and who does not seal their taximeters.
I guess even looking at this here, it's a taximeter inspection seal. So the seal basically just says that the taximeter has been inspected. And it doesn't mean that it is sealed to where the taxi company can't do their adjustments. Or is that the way it's worded in their ordinances?
Are you talking about Cedar Rapids or St. Paul?
Any of the cities that were saying that they do have the seal?
Yep, they do seal. They fasten that, and when a taximeter is sealed, the company cannot go into it. If they do go into it and they recalibrate, they adjust their fares, they have to go to, most of the time it's the police department in these cities, or in St. Paul it's an inspector. But they actually seal it, and a company cannot get into it. If they do, it has to be inspected to make sure it's calibrated correctly and then sealed.
Councilor Urfenbach.
To me, that's the point. That's where it comes down to consumer protection. This is about, and now we've heard today, and I think that makes sense, that there's some wiggle room. You know, the tires are low, the air is low, you could put some more air in it. There's wiggle room in that between the 1% above and the 4% below. I think we have to understand the taximeter is the protection for the consumer, that it has to be sealed, and it has to be sealed professionally by a disinterested third party in order to provide those protections for citizens, for the consumer. Yeah, it's going to be expensive. There's going to be some kind of fee for it. Sorry, that's going to be part of this deal, is that we want reliable businesses representing our community as taxi services, and that sealed meter is a piece of that, a very key piece of that formula.
Any other comments, questions? Councilor Aguilar?
I agree.
Hard to argue with.
Okay. Do you have anything else, Councilor Karski, on your points, or before I take this to public testimony?
I think we
Any
covered
other-
the big ones.
Just the effective date. The administration is asking for 4 months. I know that just kind of in side conversations, Councilor Aguilar and I were talking about how do we, because everyone that's currently a taxi company in Sioux Falls right now is licensed under the current rules, and we're making some pretty big changes. That is 4 months long enough as well, this is changes to this particular subsection. Do we have other options for extending when this becomes, because not only do I want to give the administration time to get the RFP for the taximeter piece, I think we need to allow the businesses time, because some of them are going to actually have to buy taximeters because they don't have taximeters now. Some of them are going to have to paint the sides of their cars. Those sorts of things are going to take some time and some cash. I think we need to allow for that in our implementation of the overall package.
Councilor Aguilar?
Well, I think I agree. But I think that we can have different effective dates for different parts of it.
Okay.
Yeah, I had asked that question earlier a few months ago, and they had come back and said, so there are certain things that, if we wanted to, we can either implement everything at once, or we could do it, looking at the different changes, what could happen immediately. And when they're up for relicense, I think the new application and some of those, justifications, the requirements that we heard today, as far as things that we want to see at time of application, I think that those could be implemented immediately when they're up for renewal. But some of the other things, I think we have to make sure that we're giving the companies adequate time.
Councilor Urfenbach?
I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, Jamie, but Jamie has just gone through the reapplication process for all of the companies just since the first of the year. So really, to me, the whole thing should be completely enforceable come this time next year, because that's when everybody re-ups. But some of those things, as you say, Councilor Aguilar, should be phased in. The taximeter maybe needs to be phased in, or however we want to do that. But that needs to be part of our conversation overall, too, before we send this to council.
Councilor Karski?
Kind of like the TIF ordinance. We've been dealing with the same things for 30 years, and I don't know why just making it easy and having it all at once. What's 3 months or 4 months when we've been dealing with this for 30 years, or we've been operating with the same ordinance for 30 years? I don't think another 90 or 120 days makes a difference, and just for the sake of keeping it simple, I'd say do it all at once. October 1st or September 1st, or pick a date.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
I'm okay with that.
We'll keep that for further discussion, and I'm sure that when it reaches the city council, there'll probably be further discussion on that too. Okay, at this time, I'm going to take this to public testimony. We're going to set a cap of 5 minutes per testimony. So at this time, if there's something that you would like to speak to on this ordinance and the changes, now is your time.
Hi, Tally Kinsley, Yellow Cab. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to those of you that took the time to come out to our facility and kind of look around and see what was going on. And I would like to extend that to anybody else that's interested that didn't make it and would like to come, and we can set it up via email or something for that. Some of those issues we kind of brought up, and we showed kind of how we do things. But again, there's so many things that I think, like right now after this discussion on the ceiling of the meters, I've got like 10 new questions that I want to ask about it. So I'd like to ask, and I could do it via email too, that either individually or all together or whatever, that the taxi companies and the entire city council could somehow meet and piecemeal these items, and because in a 5 minutes time I can't go over all the questions, because I'm going to restart the conversation on the ceiling of the meters if I do that, and so I'm wondering if there's a way where we could meet privately at your convenience, evening, daytime, weekend, or whatever, or if it would be better for me to list my questions that I have and send them out via email, I could do that. But I mean, just in this conversation alone, I've got like 6-7 more questions on the ceiling of the meters that would extend the conversation quite a bit farther than where we've already gone, and just listening to your conversation, and I'd like to be able to sit down and have the time to do that, Or if we have to do it via email, I'd be good with that too, you know. But, you know, like I have some suggestions on the fuel surcharges, and I got a lot of suggestions and questions on the ceiling of the meters that just all came up since we've been sitting here, you know. And so anyway, I'd just like to say thanks and for the attention that you guys have given this and give that some consideration. And I'll probably send out an email and go that way. You encouraged me to do that last time I was here, you know, and so I'll do that. But really, that's all I wanted to say was that I've just come up with a lot more questions that I like to ask and can't do it in 5 minutes, you know. So I'd like to extend another invitation to whoever would like to come out and visit our facility, and I'll probably do that tomorrow via email. And then I do have a ton of questions on this ceiling of the meters and that kind of thing, you know, and so anyway, I guess that's all I really wanted to say, and to thank you for taking the time to come out and visit and talk with us.
Any questions? I would just like to make a suggestion that you continue communicating with us through email, and especially with Jim David, and, you know, maybe format those questions.
Okay.
Because then that way, you know, when we do meet, or if we meet, then at least there's just a base that we can discuss.
Okay, maybe I'll type up like an outline of, just kind of an outline of what my issues are or what my questions are, and then maybe you guys can discuss it before and then we could get together and meet or something to that effect, you know. I could do that. I could email out an outline of different things that I think need to be addressed, or questions that you may not have thought of yet, or, you know, but absolutely I can do that, so.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Councilor Egler?
that brings up a good point as far as the timeline for this committee. As far as when we are looking at getting this to the council. Some of us on council won't be here after the second meeting in May. And so I'd kind of like to have that discussion at some point.
Councilor Karski?
That's what I was digging for, 2014 calendar. And I don't have one. And yeah, that's kind of where I was going to go too. This is the second meeting of the month. Do we have a council meeting on April 22nd? No, it would be April, 22nd next month.
We don't have a council meeting on the 8th. We have one the week after that in April. So that's the 15th, I believe.
So that'd be the 3rd. The 22nd would be the, okay. Or that'd be the second, third council meeting. So, so we don't have one April 22nd.
No, I believe that is correct. I believe that, Councilor
Well,
Urfenbach.
this committee usually meets on the second Tuesday, which is the 8th
Right.
of April.
Which has been canceled.
Right, but April 22nd is generally the Minnehaha and Lincoln County meetings. I would suggest perhaps this committee meet on the 29th of April, which is the 5th Monday, doesn't have a committee meeting scheduled, that maybe we could meet then. Because I'm very concerned. I mean, if we're going to wait until after the new council comes in, we start back to square one, folks.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'd prefer even to have that vote in April, or have it go to the council in April
Okay.
for the first reading. April 15th, and that's 5 weeks from now, and
Yep.
we can send this through the way we have it, and the council gets the final decision on it anyway.
I like that.
Makes sense. Okay. I want to continue before we, we end, we'll discuss the actual date. I would like to take some more public testimony, please.
Tom Warner, First Choice Taxi. In regards to the ceiling of the meters, I know you've relied on the specialists from Centrodyne. The Centrodyne meter allows for 4 rates to be programmed into that before sealing. So if rate 1 is your maximum rate and you want to run discounted rates below that, you have the capability of programming 3 additional rates at the time of sealing. We get all of our meters installed at one of those inspection shops up in Minneapolis, and that's what we do, is we just program 4 different rates in there, and then they're able to seal it or do whatever you need to do. The second concern that I have is there is a secondary business in town, Tandem Taxi, that is not a taxi business, but yet they're being allowed to use their name, which could be a big concern of public perception. This business is driving their own vehicle, taking 2 people. One of them is getting into the consumer's vehicle and driving their car under their supposed insurance. Whether or not they're checking for that insurance, I don't know. I've never used the service. But what happens when one of their employees in this personal vehicle goes, kills somebody, crashes a car, whatever may happen, but yet they're being referred to as a taxi? They're not. Jamie Palmer and I had a lengthy discussion this week on this, and she informed me that it does not fall under the regulation. But if they don't fall under the regulation, why are they allowed to be called a taxi service? I know in the financial planning industry, just because a guy sells insurance, you can't be called a financial planner without the proper licensing. So I would like to hear some discussion as far as, who is allowed to use the terminology taxi in their advertising, in their business plan. Because right now, they're being advertised all over Facebook and everything else.
Well, I guess if I could reply, you're bringing us something brand new. I have not heard about this at all.
Okay.
So I guess I would like to ask Jamie Palmer to come up and maybe give us a little explanation on that issue.
Okay.
But right now, I don't think I could reply because I don't know how they operate. I would have to get more information from the administration first.
Sure, and I did forward their Facebook link and things like that to Jamie Palmer. But I think it's something that definitely needs to be discussed, and if some terminology needs to be added in before we finalize this, just to avoid future problems like this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Offenbach?
I guess I would just say that that's why we're here. That's what we're writing, is a taxi ordinance. And so if someone's operating and calling themselves a taxi, that's why we want to enforce the taxi ordinance. That's why we got started, right?
Counselor Aguilar?
But is any of that regulated by another governmental entity like the state or federal? I mean, do we have the right to make a decision as far as what you can name your company? Is that under our auspice?
I wouldn't say that as far as what you're going to name the company, but earlier we struggled with the definition of a taxi company and what a taxi company was going to be. Whether it was going to be a number of vehicles to define the taxi company or hours of operation. So I think that's where, this may fall into that, not knowing the way they operate, but this sounds like it falls into that area that we didn't address.
Yeah, I would agree. So maybe Jamie can help us with this particular company.
Good evening, Jamie Palmer with Licensing. Tandem Taxi contacted me, well over a year ago, to explain their business model. And their business model is such that they have 2 people in a vehicle, and they get a call that somebody wants them to drive them and their own personal vehicle home. So akin to you calling a buddy and saying, hey, I'm too drunk, drive me home in my car. That's kind of how they explained it to me. So this company drives to where the people are, and one of the tandem taxi people gets out of the tandem taxi, gets into the caller's car, and drives them home. Tandem taxi follows them And then when they get to the destination, the tandem taxi person gets out of the personal vehicle and back into the tandem taxi. That's how they operate their business. So as it stands, that business model, we have no way of enforcing or making them get licensed as a taxi business because they are in the other vehicle. The ordinances clearly state that it's a passenger in your vehicle. And so we have no way of saying that you are a passenger in their vehicle, if that makes sense.
Do they have a taxi meter?
No,
Okay, so they sound more like
a general, they would fall,
service vehicle.
right. But even
Not
at
a
that,
taxi.
they don't. Even at that, they don't fall under our regulations, the way their business model is set up.
Do we license them?
No,
license
we
them?
cannot.
Councilor Karski?
I imagine they charge a flat rate,
I would imagine,
or
yeah.
negotiated rate probably. To address the insurance concern, anybody you give permission to drive your vehicle, I mean, your insurance is going to cover that vehicle, so I don't see where
Right.
that's an issue. And I don't see where this is, unless they get into that pilot or chase vehicle or whatever you want to call it, they're not hauling anybody, they're just
Right.
driving somebody's vehicle home.
And I did make that very clear to them when they called me that, and I did run this by the assistant city attorney. And yeah, I mean, we reviewed it and looked at all the ordinances, and there was no way that we could make them be licensed. And then that was the thing, I did make that clear with them, that nobody can actually get into the tandem taxi vehicle as long as they were getting into the other vehicle.
I don't see, Counselor Anderson, where this is a taxi cab issue.
And speaking about the question about the tandem taxi name, we have nothing in ordinance that regulates what somebody names their business. So unless you change that, we have no way of telling them they can't.
They would not fall underneath the passenger service vehicle part of this ordinance?
Because again, they're not hauling you.
They're not
They're not
in their
using
vehicle.
their
They don't have any
vehicle.
passengers.
If I could,
Councilor Karski?
is this the same business that's going by the name Trust Me, I'm Sober, or is that a different one altogether? Because I've heard of this one, it's a new business
I
in town.
believe
that
it
used to
must be different.
And they took the place of the one that just went out of business the 1st of February or so.
Driven, yes.
Driven, yes.
Yes.
Driven quit that business because insurance rates were too high or whatever, but, yeah, so there's more than probably one, but just because they're calling themselves a taxi doesn't mean that, I mean, they're not, if I called them up and said, hey, come and get me, they said, I can't haul you. I
Oh,
mean,
I'm
if I
sorry.
wanted just a cab ride, they're not holding themselves out, but,
Right.
okay.
And I did look at their Facebook page, and it didn't say anything that they were claiming to be a taxi. They were, one of the pages, I can't remember what it had said, but it basically kind of explained that it was assisted you in getting your car home, so.
Councilor Urfenbach?
I'm just looking at their website. They call Trust Me, I'm Sober, calls themselves a designated driver service that provides pickup services to customers, safely transporting them home in their own vehicles. Our professional drivers undergo extensive training, blah, 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 blah. But they are very clear they're driving your vehicle to keep you safe, as whoever, the customer. To me,
Okay, any other? We have public testimony, sir, if you'd like to come up, and then the podium is open for you.
Les Pietruszkiewicz, Tripoli Taxi. I have a question to that. I just came, I may not listen, maybe the question was, but I was not here. What happened if that driver driving with the other passenger own car and the passenger doesn't have insurance at all and get accident? If they claim how? That's an issue, legal issue later on. or the passenger has insurance but has no brake, and he's using with very bad brake and happens something. You see, there will be issue.
We do understand, and I think that's where the discussion
Okay.
sort of
That's
going
my
is
just
trying to
thought
find
about.
that out. But yes,
Thank you.
thank you for that question.
Hi, Weiderman, good evening. You stated something about being like at an airport and not liking the first driver, the cab that's there, and taking the second or third. You can't do that. I mean, you're going to have a fight amongst the cab drivers instantaneously. You go to New York, somebody's going to get shot. The other thing is, the last time I took a trip somewhere, there were 4 of us, and we called ahead and made arrangements for a driver. Now, that wasn't a taxi. How would that fall into this ordinance that you're trying to
If I can answer, Mr. Chair, it is covered. That service is different from a taxi service.
Yeah,
It's
it's
by
a private-
appointment only. Yep, it's a private car service. Yeah, absolutely.
But I just thought I'd point out, you
No,
can't just...
no, I totally understand that, but I think that's part of the conversation, and I think you're seeing us in a work session here talking
understand
about
that.
a lot of different things.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Please come up to the podium.
Thank you. My name's Brent Kinsley with Yellow Cab in Sioux Falls. I'm sorry I got late to the meeting. Usually we wait out there longer, but first I wanted to thank the folks that stopped by our shop to see what a brick and mortar cab business is and kind of get a insight into the overhead and all the expenses that go with being a legitimate business. We approached the city council with just wanting changes to the licensing to make sure that all these people that are operating taxis in this town, have a tax ID number. If they have more than one vehicle for hire license sticker, are they employees or are they subcontractors? Are they lease drivers? And that basically, if you're playing above board, every one of them that is an independent contractor should have listed a South Dakota tax ID number and be registered with the state. Now, it's morphed into this huge thing that, and I don't mean any disrespect at all, but I'm talking to some people that don't have any experience in the cab business. Jim David has done a good job of bringing up statistics, but these are, I'm looking up here, and there's no correlation between St. Paul, Rochester, and this is it's the 5-minute thing. Rochester, that's a hospital town. They got a flat, they're taking grandma across the street. It's totally different. Omaha, totally different. It's not the same. 90% of our business, or better, is called in. All right. When it comes to how much you're charging, all you got to do is ask, and we'll tell you. The fuel surcharge is huge, and that is why we haven't had to have a rate increase or any of this conversation since 2005, I think it is the last time I nailed it down. And it's because we're able to, in real time, adjust to the market fluctuations of gas, which is a huge cost driver. And that's the thing that I think is getting lost on, in the conversation is, and then that trickles down to the ceiling of meters. I showed you the people that was at my shop. I showed them, I got 40 brand new tires on the rack. They're all going to go on taxi cabs. Every time I change tires, they go on the front, because that's the drive wheels, and the other ones go on. That's just like a trailer. So every time I change tires, Though I said 3 out of 4 of them tires go on the front. But, you know, I got thinking about it. They all go on the front, and, the lesser ones go to the back because they're basically trailer tires. It does affect the rate as the tires wear down. But there's also some other things that you should take into consideration, and that is that, you can, when you're buying tires for 24 vehicles, you look for the best deal. And if a manufacturer suggests a certain size tire, you can get the same diameter tire in a different size, but it's still the meter needs to be calibrated. Anytime I take a car to the transmission shop, put tires on it, do any kind of drivetrain work to it, it gets calibrated. And we're talking daily. So when you're talking about sealing the meters, it's be hugely, an uninterested party is not a factor. If somebody's going to get paid for checking your meters every time or sealing them, they're an interested party. They're not, you're not going to find somebody to do it for free. So and as Tally had said, I really believe that we should, with all the cab companies, whoever wants to show up, and you can see that of the 23 cab companies or whatever there is in this town, how many show up for these meetings, and that should be an indication that they have issues, and I'm really frustrated because we're not. It's when they set the rates the last time, they set the mileage rate at $3.50 a mile, but as we've talked about, it got scrambled in the writing of the ordinance, so it's actually $3.18. We don't charge $3.18 a mile. And the reason that was artificially, at that time, that was ridiculously high, but it left room for competition, and it also left room for not having to come down here and ask for a rate increase every time the price of gas goes up. So I just want, in closing, I know I'm running out of, I just would, first of all, I'd really encourage any of you that haven't been to our shop to stop down anytime, and we would be willing to, show you what it is and how we do it. And I guess that's all I got. We really got it. It's more than 5 minutes talk. And
Thank you.
It's critical. Thank you very much.
Any questions? Anyone else like to come up and testify? And please come up.
Joseph Goodface, Falls Metro Taxi. Now, as far as sealing, as the mirrors go, like Yellow Cab was saying, the price of gas really changes a lot. I mean, right now it's well over $3, but now, let's say a month from now, the price of gas went down, like say $2 something. Now we're going to have to change the drop rate as they are, which means if you got like, say, one car that's, that's a minimum, but if you got like 20, 30 cars, it's going to cost you a whole lot. I mean, I don't know how much you guys, will charge just to put a sticker on that meter, but it will become pricey. It's going to cost a lot of us a lot of money, especially if we got to do it like, for example, I just changed like 2 tires because of all the potholes in town. And that right there just costs a lot of money, right there. But now I'm going to have to buy not only just the tires, I'm going to have to have some guy inspect a meter when it's just a charge. It put like a small little sticker, probably about 1 or 2 inches on the meter. I don't know. I think it's kind of redundant, actually, because, like I said, price of gas, they fluctuate on and off all the time. Because at one point we were actually almost about $4 a gallon. I don't know when that was. I can't remember when that was, but it was actually that high. So let's say if we gotta do that all the time, yeah, it's going to cost a lot. And one subject that was brought to my attention here recently was the permanent stickering on the cabs. There are a lot, let's say, I think there's like 18, 19 cabs right now, what my understanding is, and at least about 6 or 7 of them don't have any permanent stickers on them. So let's say, like my daughter wanted to take a cab, but she called one particular cab company. Well, she doesn't know what color it is. There's no stickers on the car. So she could be looking for a red vehicle, like a red van. But she doesn't know if it's the right company. So she could be overcharged. That's where I think it's right to put the drop rate along with mileage, not only on the inside, but on the outside as well. Because I actually did that. And people actually like that. That way they know that how much they actually are going to be charged per mile. So I think it's kind of a big issue because I know a lot of them actually refuse to put permanent stickers on their vehicles. So, and another thing that got brought up too, I picked a guy up from one of the hotels, I think it was the Ramada, and he was actually a former cab driver out of New Orleans, and he was wondering how much we're actually paying for insurance. And I told him, we pay a lot in insurance. It's like, well, we don't even pay that much. So my concern is, why are we paying so much in insurance? And if you look at how much everyone else is paying for insurance, like say for example, Rochester and St. Paul, they have what was it, $300,000 for liability, and yet we're paying like $500,000. And our general is $1 million. And Des Moines is only paying $750,000. And these cities are a lot bigger than us. So I was kind of wondering if you guys have any answer, why for us only having like a population of only 165,000, and these people have a lot more, like bigger, larger cities, why we're paying so much in insurance right now.
Any questions? Okay. Thank you. All right, I think I'm going to close this down to committee discussion. Is there anything after public testimony? Is there anything else that we would need to discuss at this point in time? And then we need to talk about the timeline that we want to try to move this forward. Councilor Karski, please.
Jim, David, and I were corresponding a little bit here, and I asked him to confirm how many rates a taxi meter can have in it, and one of them can have up to 8 different rates in it at one time. So, the whole sealing the taxi meter, to me, shouldn't be that big of an issue. I can see where maybe, and I don't know if we have to address it in ordinance, that if tires are changed or the transmission or drivetrain has been worked on, that it maybe needs to be recalibrated. I don't know. We don't have that in here right now, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So going back to the ceiling of the taxi meters, and just the equipment that's out there, seems like we don't have much of an issue there to me.
I guess my issue on this is that who's going to do the calibration? We don't have a company here in the city that do the calibration. Right now, the companies do their own. So, you know, once again, that's going to be, when you're talking just changing tires, having to go to a third party for calibration, you know, to pay that expense. I guess I'm sort of questioning that expense. I think that would be a major expense to a lot of these companies because, you know, their vehicles are on the road making, you know, there are a lot of miles on them, and that could be, a calibration could be something that could happen at the very least every other month. So, Councilor Aguilar? Yeah.
Jim, if we could,
Sure,
I don't know if Jim
please.
has some information on that.
Just some clarification on the section, the subsection that deals with taximeters. The way it reads right now, and I'll ask the Keith Allenstein if I do say something that's incorrect here, but really the burden is on the company. There is no requirement that there's an annual inspection. The recalibration could be done by anybody. It could be done by the company themselves. It could be done by whoever. It's the sealing of the meter that would be done by the independent party or by the city itself. So if you are a taxi cab driver, you could actually calibrate it yourself, bring it to the spot where they actually do the mileage test. It is correct, and then it's sealed by that third party. The third party is not responsible for recalibrating. It's on the company.
Can you recalibrate it without breaking that seal?
You have to break the seal to recalibrate.
Okay. So,
Do we have any estimates on what it cost? No. Do we have any idea what it costs to calibrate? You know, what it would cost each time to do something like that?
No, no estimates.
Councilor Urfenbach?
I would think that would be based on that RFP. It's going to be based on a bid process, and we'll
Well, I
get the
thought
best deal.
maybe we'd hear from other cities that, you know, we've used them as examples. And, you know, I'm sure somewhere we could find out what the cost of a calibration would be. Councilor Urfenbach.
Based on our conversations, I wonder if we should move this to first reading on the 1st of April, second reading on the 15th of April. That gives us time for the whole council to come into this conversation and for us to do some more negotiating back and forth and still hit that mid-May deadline we seem to have.
is that a motion?
It could be yes, I would make that motion.
I'll second that.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion on this? All in favor, say aye.
Aye. And
That
then
passes. Okay,
If I
that
might
passes
just say
4-0.
one thing then, in terms of, I mean, we're sending this now from this committee to the whole council, and so I would invite folks, I mean, we're at a point where we can't do, you know, any more group meetings. It just creates all kinds of issues, but in terms of open meetings and all those sorts of things. But I would say individually and by email to please let your council members know how you feel, let them understand what the issues are, and I would urge my colleagues to visit at least one taxi company, if not more, to just see how it works, because it does make a difference to see what, you know, to understand what how that business works. But I would say then to you folks that have input, get with us by email, get with us by phone, you know, whatever. For me personally, email is the best and easiest, and it's the busiest month of the city council year. Even without an election, this is our busiest month. So I would just say, cut us some slack, but get with us individually. So, thanks.
Any other comments? And I will also encourage you to use the email, you know, send us your questions, send us your concerns, And then at that point in time, you know, like I said, if we can make some time to come down, visit, have conversations, you know, I always try to make a little time for a cup of coffee or something with someone to discuss these issues. So please give us emails, and then from there we can communicate and try to get some of these things worked out before this comes to the full council. Okay. With that being said, we have open discussion. Do we have anything else that we'd like to discuss at this time? Okay.
Motion to adjourn, Erpenbach.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
This meeting is now adjourned.